You are listening to the Sound and Faith podcast, coming to you from Faith Baptist Fellowship in beautiful Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
It's lovely. It's lovely. A little bit of snow.
A little bit of snow. My name is Pastor Thomas Slauson.
And I'm Pastor Mike Johnson.
Our aim is to encourage the saints of Faith Baptist Fellowship and anyone else who might be listening to believe sound doctrine and to live lives that adorn the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Amen.
It's good to have you back, Pastor Mike.
Thanks. Yeah.
Missed you last week.
It was awesome, though. I loved hearing Pastor Jimmy and you. And your good word on discipleship.
It was so much fun. We get sick every now and then, and that's just how life goes. But it was great to have Pastor Jimmy on and get the ball rolling on that conversation having to do with discipleship.
Yes. So maybe I don't know. You want to just jump right in?
Yeah, let's just jump right in today because we got the ball rolling last week with the conversation about what is discipleship, what does it mean.
Could you recap just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so essentially what it boils down to is discipleship in a Christian context, because Jimmy made a very good point that we're all being discipled in some way, shape, or form. We're all following someone in something. We're all following some line of thinking. But in a Christian context, it is following and being obedient to Jesus Christ
Amen.
In our lives. And so the Great Commission, when Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations, he wants us to go out and make followers of Jesus Christ and teach them to observe all that he has commanded. And so it is a lifelong process of following Jesus. It's not something you just do one time. You become a follower of Jesus, but you continue to follow him and be conformed to his image and obey him.
So if people listen to this in real time, like it drops this Friday, you're preaching this Sunday.
Yes.
Do you think you'll talk about discipleship?
Yeah, and it's great. I absolutely will. I'll be preaching from John chapter 1, verses 35 through 42, and it's about Jesus calling his first disciples. So the theme of discipleship is alive and well right now in our church. We talked about it last week. We're talking about it on the podcast this week. It'll come up in the sermon this Sunday, and I'm looking ahead to the text on the 25th coming up that you're going to be preaching on. Looks like it's there again, too.
And in our elder retreat.
Yeah.
In a big way. It was a buzzword, one of the buzzwords as we were talking about where we want to be as a church and grow as a church. So awesome. So if you're listening to this on Friday or Saturday, make sure you're here. It's going to be a great sermon. If you're listening to this on Monday or Tuesday, wasn't that a great sermon? So, there you go.
I haven't preached it yet, but I am looking forward to preaching the text. It's such a great text. It's it just highlights the beauty of the culture of discipleship, and that's a word that we're going to talk about today. That's the title of this episode. What is a culture of discipleship? What does that mean? Why are we using that expression?
Yeah. So I was thinking about how to illustrate that. If one time I went to a tribe in Central America that was very remote, and one of the missionaries warned us that they had a culture of thievery among that tribe. And what they meant was it was totally okay to steal so long as you didn't get caught. If you got caught, there was consequences, but stealing was kind of a part of their culture. They've ingrained this thievery into their culture. And so basically he was telling us to be careful with our stuff. But, when you think about that, I knew exactly what he meant. He meant that thieving happens all the time, that it's commonplace, that I should expect it, that I shouldn't be surprised if I see it. That it is everywhere, that people are teaching one another how to do it. They're learning how to steal at young ages and all through life, all of those things. There's a culture of thievery in that tribe, sadly. I mean, I'm hoping by now the gospel has had its way among that people group, and they have renounced that culture and traded in for a culture of discipleship. But if you think about a culture of discipleship, it's the same thing, right? You expect it. You want you know it's going to happen. You're aware of it. You're not surprised when you see it happening. It's everywhere. It's pervasive. People are talking about it. People are teaching one another how to do it. That's what we mean by culture of discipleship.
Yeah, and so we want that to be part of the natural life of our church. We want it to be pervasive.
Yes.
And I'll just throw this out there. I mean, we talk about this at Faith a lot. We really have a strong culture of prayer here at Faith. couple of weeks ago when we had Pastor Dana on talking about why do we pray the word, one of the things that's been ingrained strongly in this church is this culture of prayer. When we reach out to the Lord all the time in all of our circumstances. And and so when we talk about a culture of discipleship, I hope, and let me clarify here from a pastoral perspective, we're not saying that we don't have a culture of discipleship
not at
here
all.
at Faith.
Not at all. We're saying we're looking to the Lord to grow in our culture of discipleship as a church, and so it's no critique.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just pushing forward. We believe God has called us to have that kind of culture, and as pastors and leaders, elders, we want to see that happen.
Right, and so like we say, we have a culture. We have a culture of prayer. We want to always grow and maintain that culture of prayer, and the same thing with a culture of discipleship. I do believe we have a culture of discipleship here. We always want to be growing. We always want to keep that fanned into flame, as it were. And so that's an important thing to point out there.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's good. We're not breaking new ground. Yeah, that was one of the things I was encouraged by our elder retreat, is that I didn't feel like we were coming up with anything novel. Like we were talking about what it means to be the church.
Yeah,
and just wanting to continue as a group of believers to grow into that.
Well, let's dive in on this episode then, because last week was more, I would say, we got a little bit into some specifics with Jimmy, but it was a lot more 30,000-foot view of discipleship. When we talk about discipleship, when we start talking about building a culture of discipleship, the way Jimmy put it was there's more than one way to skin a cat.
Yeah.
Or maybe he told me that in a text message. I don't know if cats came up in last week's episode, but
if you're a cat lover, that's just an expression.
Sorry about that. Yeah. It's more than one way to skin a chicken.
Actually, you know what that comes from? Skin a cat.
What's that?
It's how to skin a catfish.
Oh,
you can nail it to
really?
the tree and pull it off. Because there's, it's typically hard to skin a catfish. It's not about like your fuzzy. It's a Southern phrase, probably from the bayous of Louisiana.
See, I grew up using that phrase, and I had no idea.
Yeah, so I'm from the South, and so that's why I know that. But it's about catfish. So rest easy, my cat loving friends.
All right, that's bonus information for everyone today. It has nothing to do with discipleship. But there's more than one way to go about discipleship. You maybe could have a formal way of doing it, an informal way of doing it. What are some of those differences? What does that look like practically?
Sure. Well, okay, so there's a lot that goes on in the church that is actually discipleship in a formal sense, So when I preach on a Sunday morning, or when you preach this Sunday, that's formal discipleship. We are discipling people in the context of the congregation, and in a very formal way. It's set. It's ingrained in our tradition. It's there's nothing really informal about it. We know all about what's about to happen, and it's set up for the purpose of discipleship.
And you could say that all of the elements of our worship in some form, in some way, do that.
Yes.
When our elders lead a pastoral prayer, there is an element of discipleship that's happening.
There is.
All of those things.
Yeah, I would say that there's also informal things happening during that time, like the fellowship, when you're gathered around in the back there and you're talking about a hard thing you went through that week and you asked a question, so what did the Lord teach you through that? There's some discipleship going on there that's informal.
Yeah.
But I'd say the majority of what we do on a Sunday morning, I think it's like the Sunday school classes, all of those things, that's all formal discipleship.
Yeah, yeah.
Informal, I would say, is like outside of the program, outside of the plan, where we get together with other believers and we try to teach them what it means to follow Jesus, outside of the teaching, preaching ministries of the church.
Yeah, could you say, and correct me if I'm wrong here, could you say there are elements of within that, all of that, there's elements of active discipleship and passive discipleship? What I mean by passive is when I see a mature believer and how they go about their Christian life, it has an impact upon me. I mean, I remember in my young years when I was a new father watching some older Christian fathers and mothers lead their families well. And it wasn't as if they were sitting down to me and saying, you do this, you do this,
Right.
you do this. Like I watched them. I watched them have family worship time. I watched them shepherd their children. I watched how they spoke to their wives. All of those things like that. That discipled me.
Yeah.
And even there may not have been a conscious setting out to say, hey, we're going to do this. I'm going to teach you how to speak to your wife. But they modeled that even in their lives.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right, And, Philippians, the book of Philippians has a lot to say about that. Imitate such men,
Yeah.
Paul says, right? Like, and he talks about Timothy and Epaphroditus and these guys who loved Jesus and followed Christ. And he's saying, follow them. Don't follow these other guys. There's bad passive discipleship too. Don't follow these other guys who are out for selfish ambition and those kind of things. But follow these men. Follow guys like Timothy, who cared for the interest of others, or Epaphroditus, who, even though he was sick, cared for you, and cared for the flock of God.
Yeah. In a personal context where maybe it's one-on-one or a friendship or relationship, can you also have informal discipleship happening there?
I think so, and I'm not sure how important the divide is between those two at that level. Like, I think you can be more structured, or less structured, with your discipleship. So I had a good brother who did both with me for a long time. Like, we would sit down and we'd study the scriptures together, and he would point out things and those kind of things. And then he'd also invite me to go with him somewhere to help him load a truck or something, So there was both going on, and I think in his mind, I'm sure of it actually, in his mind, all of that was him discipling me. One was like hands and feet, let's just see how to do life and work and, live for Christ with our lives. And the other was, and then some of the passive stuff you talked about too, like I'd spend the night at his house and see his family and see how he interacted with his wife and his children.
Yeah.
And all of that, I know he wanted me to see, so that not just I would think that he's awesome or something, but that I would go away and say, I want to follow Christ like that.
Yeah. I have to add this in because, I think a lot of times people think, and I don't want to dissuade people from doing this kind of stuff, but discipleship has to be in every circumstance, older man going to a younger man, older woman going to a younger woman. Hey, why don't we start getting together for a Bible study every week? Now, that kind of stuff is phenomenal. And if you have the ability to engage in that type of relationship, by all means. I mean, there's some of the most valuable times in my life were people doing that kind of stuff with me. But there are also numerous other legitimate ways to engage in informal discipleship with people that I think can be very valuable.
Yes.
I mean, you're a hunter, right?
Yeah.
Can a deer stand be a means to discipleship?
No, you have to be quiet because the deer will be afraid if they hear you. No, but
Boy, you just smeared my example.
actually, I got into hunting to disciple my son.
Yeah.
My sons. I wanted to do that so that I could teach them something about life.
Yeah.
And so definitely a lot of informal discipleship, but certainly we're quiet when we're hunting and all of that.
Right.
So it's not the verbal thing going on there, but there's lots of discipleship that was going on in that.
It was some of the richest times early on when I was in ministry and I was leading some youth in a small Mississippi town. There was I would call it paintball discipleship.
Wow.
There were groups of us that would get together quite literally.
Friends, you heard it here first. There's something called paintball discipleship.
We would get together 2 to 3 times a month. I mean, it was happening very often, and all these kids in our youth group and other youth groups started buying paintball guns. We'd go out and play in the woods. We'd play for a couple hours. We'd sit around. We'd light a campfire afterwards. We'd laugh. We would talk, and it would just be a time to start opening up about the things of the Lord. And many of those guys now, through the multitude of influences in life, are following the Lord now and faithfully raising their families. Yeah. So I think we look for those opportunities, even in things like loading a truck or stuff like that, to help point people to Christ.
But if I could push back just a tad.
Absolutely.
In the early aughts, there was the let's do life together movement, where everybody was talking about doing life together.
Yeah.
And there was a purposeful minimizing of the structured, formal, intentional
right.
aspects of discipleship. And I think And like it boils down to two guys fishing and not talking. Like well, yes, those things are part of doing life together, and they're important, and they're part of discipleship even. But I think they're impotent without an intentionality of I want to help this person see Jesus and grow in Christ likeness, and there has to be that intentionality. Without that intentionality, you're just doing what everybody does in this world, and that's not necessarily discipleship, or not the kind of discipleship we're after. Like, it's kind of what Pastor Jimmy was talking about. It's discipling it could be discipling in a godless way, a way that doesn't have anything to do with God or Christ or the gospel. So I think there does need to be an element of intentionality.
Yes, I think that's the key right there, and that's totally. I wasn't trying to get away from that. Right. I think there has to be intentionality, but we can be intentional too. We want to be intentional with maybe a more structured way of going around about studying the Bible.
Yeah.
And even in just the regular everyday activities, still be intentional.
Yes.
Be intentional in those. Be intentional in taking your son hunting. Be intentional in playing paintball.
Or even the
loading a refrigerator.
Like even the conversations. Like you brought up hunting. So you go hunting. It's an unsuccessful hunt. You drive home. And the things you talk about can have that kind of intentionality of why it's okay that sometimes things don't work out the way we want, and why it's okay that sometimes we pray for things to happen and they don't happen. And I mean, lots of life conversations can happen with some intentionality. And I personally love the older, younger dynamic, and I think that's really important. Although I do think there's a lot of mutual discipleship that can happen, but I think the older in the faith, younger in the faith dynamic is super helpful in that there are people who could really benefit from me, because I've walked down the road a little bit further than them. Yeah. And there are people who've walked down the road further than me, and I can learn from them, and I need to learn from them. And so there's that dynamic going on. And I think that's from God, so that
absolutely.
There's discipleship happening in those areas, and older women are teaching younger women, and older men are teaching younger men, and all of those things.
So as we move on here in our conversation, we're talking about, we've talked a lot about informal, formal discipleship, what that looks like. I think you hit the nail on the head. Intentionality needs to be the key. We always need to be intentional.
Amen.
In discipling others within the church, whether that be in informal context, formal context. Can things become or ever become overly programmed? Is there a danger of that?
Oh man, yeah, there is. And we could look at programming and think effectiveness or fruit. Things that aren't necessarily attached to just having programs. Now programming can be very good, and I think the intentionality is super important. And we want to be people who think about how to do this well. And so there's programming that I think could be helpful. But I think we could equate in the same way that, I don't know about you, but if I have an especially busy week, I often think that I've just done a lot of good. But I can be very busy and get nothing done. I can be very busy and have no fruit.
Yeah.
And so, yes, programming is important. I don't think it's everything, and I think we need to be careful not to throw programming out, because we often throw intentionality out.
Right.
But also not see programming as the end all. And when we say programming, we mean like having discipleship classes, the informal or the Bible studies and those kind of things, faith groups. All of those are programming. I mean, in a sense.
Yeah. We have programs here at Faith.
Lots.
We, through all of our middle hour classes, the Sunday school, the youth, all of those things are in a sense programs.
Yes.
And they're intentional ways of going about discipling people.
Along with that, I love that you said that last thing, intentional ways. Even in those, we can forget the intentionality, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like we can just do our thing.
Danger.
We can just do our thing, and the intentionality not be there, and the helpfulness also not be there.
Yeah,
to the same degree.
That's easy. So it's one of those things where we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
Another great expression that I love.
we have to figure out the etymology of that one, because that doesn't have to do with catfish.
I explained that to a Russian one time, and they were like, "We totally don't understand what you're saying right there."
They've got some funny ones.
They've
though.
got some funny ones
You know,
too. Anyway, but we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because there are intentional, planned ways of going about doing
Yes.
stuff that are good and they're
good.
helpful, but you don't ever want to lose the intentionality. But there's also a danger in thinking that unless we have a program, discipleship cannot happen.
Right.
And again, goes back to the intentionality. Well, so you brought this up at our elder meeting, our elder retreat a couple of weekends ago. This theme of a culture of discipleship at Faith came up multiple times.
Yeah.
Something that's definitely on the hearts of all of our elders here, and I believe on the hearts of our members at Faith. You know, how does the leadership then at Faith, how do we intend to see a culture of discipleship continue to grow at our church?
I love that question. And if you think of like how, you know, Pastor Dana was pretty influential in this, how he was able to really develop and grow a culture of prayer. You know, at the very basic level, he prayed.
Yes.
You know, and he prayed together with other believers, and he organized prayer, and there's prayer happening and prayer on purpose, and I think you can do the same thing and just replace the word prayer with culture. Although, you know, we're still going to do the prayer. You know, we want both. You know, and I think that they're both intertwined, actually. You know, but we're going to model it. You know, like one of the ways I think leaders can be very effective in spreading a culture of discipleship is by discipling. Like themselves.
Yeah.
Like serious about discipleship. Like when I'm serious about discipling younger men, and I'm wanting them to grow in the Lord and, you know, prepare themselves for eldership one day and those kind of things. When I'm serious about that, they're going to catch that and they're going to do that.
Yes.
And if we have 9 elders, if all 9 of those elders, if all of us were doing that, and I'm not saying we're not, again, we're growing in this, but if all of us do that, I mean, think of the impact.
Yeah.
And think of the spread of that.
If you're around me for any length of period of time and you hear my testimony, the name Steve Knott is going to come up. Someone who was incredibly influential in my young Christian life, in my early to mid 20s, even on into my 30s. And, you know, I just remember how he took me under his wing and discipled me. There was a lot of life-on-life discipleship, always intentional. There was some very structured things that we did. But, you know, I just remember thinking, God, give me the opportunity to be a Steve Knott to someone else
awesome.
one day.
You know,
awesome. And so, you know, he didn't say, Thomas, now you go out and do this. He modeled it.
Yeah.
And he lived it in such a way that's like, man, I really want to do that one day.
Yeah.
I want to be able to, we don't mean that in a prideful, arrogant way. We just be like, you know, Lord, as you grow me and give me experience in different areas of life and teach me things, you know, it's what Paul commands others to do. Teach others,
Yes.
you know, that they would also be able to instruct.
Yeah, 2 Timothy 2.
Yeah.
Right? The things that you have learned among many witnesses, the same commit to faithful men who will also teach other men also.
Yeah.
Right? Or
Yeah.
I said also twice, but yeah. So that's awesome. You know, I have the similar stories. Like it's interesting. As I look back, there's high level instruction in my life that has been helpful. You know, there's been pastors who I didn't know very well, who massively impact my life through their teaching and through opening the Word to me, showing me how that's done and those kind of things. And there are others I don't even know, you know, or know well. You know, like. I could drop names. John Piper, you know, like his books and his preaching, God has really used that in my life. And John Stott, you know, his books God has really used in my life. Spurgeon, you know, his preaching has been massively used. I don't know. I've met John Piper a couple of times, but I don't know him, and I haven't met these other guys. You know, it's all through their.
I hope you haven't met Spurgeon yet.
Nah, one day I will.
One day.
I like that you said yet.
Yeah.
You know? High level stuff, right? Like,
right. Yeah.
But a lot of my growth came through unknown men like Rick, who was a youth pastor when I was just becoming a believer, and who discipled me, and Raymond in Florida, who I hope hears this, you know, because God massively used him in my life. Just the day-to-day watching him lead and all of those kind of things. John in Shadron, how God used him in my life. Like, it's not the well-known names, the high-level discipleship that had the most impact in my life. I mean, it's hard to say what was most, right? But man, God used those men.
Can I say something very pastoral here for a moment? Especially, I want to say this to the men and the women in our church who have been walking with the Lord and are known as faithful followers of Christ. The younger believers are watching you.
Yes. Yeah.
They're watching you. Everything you do is important. I remember we had Daryl Runyon's funeral here last fall. Sudden passing, and just a beautiful service. And I had a brother here at church come up to me afterward that I don't know if he actually knew Daryl super well. He knew who he was. They had met and they had gotten together a couple of times. But there wasn't like this lifelong relationship. But he had tears in his eyes and just how, my goodness, I hope that Christ is honored like that one day if I pass.
What a good word.
And just it was
when you pass.
Yeah. when I pass. Yeah, but the point there was, people were watching his life.
Yeah.
And that's just an encouragement. I think you're part of that culture of discipleship. Is be aware, brothers and sisters out there, especially you who are older and been walking with the Lord. You're being watched.
Yes.
And I mean that as an encouragement.
Right.
Model that godliness in all that you do. And because you're teaching and you're instructing at the same time.
And, like what a massive role you can play in. Like I'm thinking of elderly people, who have known the gospel all their lives and lived for Christ. Man, I know a lot of times a guy in that situation could start thinking, man, I'm not useful anymore. I'm not involved anymore. What could I do in the church? Disciple a younger man to love Jesus, love his wife, love his kids, and learn to disciple others. Like, I think massive impact.
Yeah,
massive impact.
Absolutely. I want to throw this in there, and I know this is one of those episodes I can tell we're both getting really excited about the subject matter, and it could go really long. So for the sake of time, I'll try to keep this brief. But when we talk about our wanting to grow our culture of discipleship here at Faith, the structure's already there. The foundation's already there. We have a culture of discipleship. We want to continue to grow that. And this little mug that I'm holding right here, and if you're watching the video, you and I both have the same mug today.
It's a good mug.
We do have a couple of these in the Resource Center if you want one. But we've got these 5 little icons on here. We've got a love, we've got like a heart in a box, and then followed by 5 icons. And we've got one that represents the Trinity, so love God. We've got one that's got an open Bible with hands praying, love God's word and prayer. A friend with his arm around the shoulder of another friend, love one another. Some little houses that looks like a neighborhood, love our neighbors, and then the cross, love the gospel. Our 5 loves are really a beautiful way to say this is our culture of discipleship, loving God, his word and prayer, one another, loving our neighbors, loving the gospel. We cultivate those things in our lives, whether it be through formal or informal things, both with intentionality. But seeing those grow in our lives is really those pillars that kind of hold up that culture of discipleship that we have.
Yes, and I the beautiful thing with that is we are well positioned to grow in our discipleship culture.
Yeah.
Everything is there. Everything is in place. We're there. We love the gospel. We love one another. We have good values. We're on the right path. And so now's the time, we believe as elders, now is the time to press into this and to really grow as disciplers and disciplees. We want to, and I'd say, if you're thinking about how to do that, like just you're listening and you're part of Faith, and how can I grow this culture of discipleship? Well, take inventory. Like, who are you discipling?
Yeah.
Think about that. And who can you disciple? Like, look around. And one thing I have found is that if there's nobody at present that, I start praying, Lord, would you bring somebody in my life that I can really influence and really encourage? And he does.
Yes.
Sometimes even that day, somebody will come to mind and I could really encourage that brother.
Yeah. Cup of coffee, lunch, breakfast, get together, invite him over, take him out, Well, so many opportunities
Yes.
out there. And if the Lord be intentional in all of it. If the Lord opens up to say, hey, let's start reading a book together. Let's start studying a book of the Bible. Absolutely pursue that. But yeah, I think that's a great word there, Pastor Mike. Well, let's start kind of bringing this in together here right now, because we've talked about the culture of discipleship, what it means, programmed, planned, some of those pitfalls perhaps of going too far in one direction or not doing enough and not being intentional. Let's kind of hone this in. When we talk about the mission of the church is to make disciples and equip them for growth in service. That's our mission here at Faith, and we want to do that among all the nations. How does this discipleship that we do among one another relate to reaching out to our neighbors, evangelizing the world, global missions, all of those things?
Well, let me take one of those, and I think it's representative. So, global evangelism. How does discipleship reach the Kurds in northern Iran? Okay, so discipleship in western Nebraska. How does that affect the Kurds in northern Iran?
It's Iraq, I think.
I'm sorry, Iraq.
Yeah.
Northern Iraq. Yeah. So I want to talk about KJ. I can't say her name because she works there, but KJ is her initial, we'll just call her KJ. She went to our home group. She became part of our family, kind of. We encouraged her in the Word. We saw her grow in the church. She was a part in every way in the church. We did our very best to informally disciple her, and then see her discipled in the formal ways in the church too. And she grew. God was at work in her life. She saw missions being preached and talked about. And when she graduated college, she let it be known to the elders, I believe God is sending me to the nations. Where should I go? And today she's serving in Kurdistan in northern Iraq, and she's got Arabic, and she is learning Kurdish, and man, God's at work among her, and so much in every way, and you can take every element of what you mentioned, evangelism, outreach, all of those things, and it works the same way. We train up people through discipleship, a lot of times, mostly through informal discipleship.
Yes.
And God uses that to bring about discipleship to the nations.
We have other examples like that at our church too. We have another brother, I won't mention his name, but discipled along in this church, taught, equipped, who is now seeking to reach a completely unreached people group with the gospel. So what we do
in Eastern Europe?
Yeah. And you think about, I love thinking about this a lot, and I'm even going to allude to this some in my sermon on Sunday, so I won't give too much away. But, you're here today as a believer, and if you could trace back who told you about Jesus and who told that person about Jesus, you could keep going back to those
apostles.
To the apostles in the upper room. It started there. The gospel went forth, and someone told someone who told someone, and it kept going until the word came to your ears.
There's a discipleship parentage, right? It goes all the way back to the gospel as it was in real time unfolding.
I had a roommate in seminary who was from a minority people group in Myanmar, and in the story of the conversion of his tribe was just so beautiful. It was missionaries that had come there and had labored for many, many years to communicate the gospel to his people group 150 years ago. And, through that conversion, he, is walking with the Lord. He went to seminary. He went on to become a pastor. What we do now echoes through eternity.
And I don't want to guilt trip anyone, but if you take that and you think back about your own parentage, how God has used every generation, all the way back to the apostles, it's like a line of dominoes. And how tragic it would be if you ever set up dominoes and there's that one domino that everything ends with. I don't want it to end with me.
No.
You know what I mean? I want the dominoes to keep falling, by God's grace. And so there's an encouragement for us to keep those dominoes falling, so that future generations continue to hear the gospel, and you're just in that parentage by God's grace.
Yeah, that's a great example right there. So wrapping this up here for today, we could keep going on and on, I think, because it kind of lights my fire whenever we start talking about this. But, what if someone says, help? I've never been discipled by anyone. How do I even start? I need someone to disciple me. What do they do?
I think they look around in the local church. Don't go beyond the local church. Go to your local church, and hopefully you go to Faith. So it's a good church. Find a brother who is walking with the Lord,
or sister,
or sister, or sister. If you're a man, find a brother, and go ask him. Would you help me? And it could be a specific area. Like, say you're a young man and you're just struggling with the whole balance of, like, how do I be present at home with my kids when work is stressful, and those kind of things. Find a brother who has God has worked in his life in that way, and say, how do you do that? Like, help me. Can we get coffee together and you just walk me through that? Like, how do I honor God in my family relationships while also serving with my whole heart in my workplace? In other words, ask somebody to disciple you.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to do it. I point blank remember asking some men early on in my life, my Christian life, disciple me.
Yeah,
teach me, show me, help me learn.
Yeah, it's vulnerable. I think it's a mark of maturity.
Yeah,
I think I want to grow so bad that I'm willing to be awkward and say, would you help me see things?
Now, what if you've been walking with the Lord for a while and you realize, I don't think I've ever discipled anybody or really been intentional about doing that? What advice would you give to them?
Same thing. Like, go find somebody to, look around in your local church, somebody who's struggling, who just needs somebody with them, and not the ones that everybody's talking to and discipling. Find somebody that no one is, and just, hey, would you like to come over for coffee and read the word with me, or just talk, or go fishing and be intentional on that fishing trip, those kind of things.
And I will add one point of caution here.
Yeah.
In all of this, the goal is to get people to become followers of Jesus.
Yes. And you're going to talk about this in your sermon on Sunday.
Never a follower of ourselves. Right. Never becoming dependent upon us for all of their emotional and spiritual needs. We want them to be passionate followers of Jesus and look to him. And that's the thing about that intentionality, is always pointing them to Christ.
Another plug for the sermon this Sunday. Listen to that. I know that it's going to point that direction. The model of discipleship is follow me as I follow Christ.
Absolutely, yeah.
Which the end is follow Jesus.
Yeah, follow Jesus. Well, good discussion today, Pastor Mike. I think we have a few questions we do want to get to today. We'll do these. And the first one comes to us from Mr. Anonymous.
It's a real name.
Someone asked, what are your thoughts on the He Gets Us ads?
So these came on during the Super Bowl,
Yep.
and I didn't watch them.
They came on last year, too.
They did, yeah. I didn't watch them then either. I did watch the Super Bowl, but I didn't really see these ads. I saw the, part of one. So I don't really know what to say to... I do know that there's been, a social media storm since then of people saying, no, these are awesome, or these are terrible, or these are great. So I have some thoughts about that, but I don't really have thoughts about the ads themselves. You watched them, though, didn't you?
I saw them because I was watching the game, and I was sitting there when it came on.
What were your
commercial? Okay, bottom line is this, and we could go on and on about this, but I want to keep it simple. I think knowing who is supporting those ads, and this is public knowledge, it's the people that own Hobby Lobby, who are thoroughly evangelical Christians. They may not be on the same theological page as all of us about everything, but they're evangelical Christians. Their intention is very good. They are trying to pique interest in skeptics, doubters, people who are lost, who are not believers in Jesus Christ, and they are doing that through some ways that I might just call edgy. My caution would be is that I wonder if everything that they're presenting is the best way to go about stirring up that conversation. If it opens up a door for talking to someone and pointing them to the biblical Christ, which when you go to their website for He Gets Us, it looks like they're trying to do that. They're saying, now that we've piqued your interest, we want you to read the Bible about Jesus, which I think is a good thing. We do want people to read the Bible. But I do worry a little bit, maybe it's a little bait and switchy. They present Jesus in a way that almost seems to be like, oh, he was progressive. He was, accepting of everyone without asking them to change. And that's not the case, So is it the best? Am I a huge fan of them? No.
Okay.
But do I absolutely think the most horrible things on the face of the planet? No, I don't think that either. I think the intention was good.
Let me say a couple of things just in broader terms. One, when I was in Bible college, I would hang out on the campus of, U of M in Ann Arbor. Is that U of M or Michigan State? Yeah, U of M in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And there was a street preacher there who was quite caustic in the way that he went about things. Like he would call people all kinds of mean names as they're walking by, right there on the campus. He'd be there every day. And I would go there, not to hear him, because I didn't care for the way that he went about it, and I didn't think it was very right. But I would find people who are very disturbed by it, and I'd talk gospel with them. And it was very helpful. So there's ways to, even if something's not theologically perfect or right on, there's ways to use that for good things, and so the he gets me ad, he gets us ads.
He gets us, yeah.
You could use those and use them as a segue to gospel talk, you know. And the second thing I want to say is just a pastoral word about our culture, and that is we're always looking for something to quibble about. And
Us?
Christians,
really?
And I don't think we ought to be that. I don't think we ought to take to social media every time we see something and just start taking sides and tribe up and I'm on this side, you're on that side, you're wrong. Man, we have very little time to do a lot of things.
Yes.
Let's do what matters.
Let's not become keyboard warriors.
Right. So those are my two words.
Yeah.
Use these things for good, and let's not just look for things to argue about.
We do have one more anonymous question. Why don't we celebrate Lent?
Okay, so real quick, Lent is that traditional celebration of the 40 days before Easter, commemorating the time when Jesus fasted before his temptation.
Yeah.
So there's 40 days there, 40 days. And a lot of churches, notably the Catholic Church, would celebrate Lent. Some Protestant denominations do too.
Yeah.
Actually, some Baptist churches do, which they would give up something, or they would, there'd be some sort of observance of these 40 days of grievous preparation for Easter, for the joy of Easter. We don't celebrate it, and here's why. There's no real theological reason to not celebrate something. We just look like this. Like we would just look at it and say, well, it's a tradition in the church, and there's only so many traditions we can follow. Yeah. There's only so many that we can find useful, and Lent hasn't crossed our radar as a useful one all that much, And so that's one of the ones that we don't. And if you followed everything, every day would be part of the liturgical calendar as far as your celebrations go.
Yeah.
So we choose which ones we find the most helpful, and that's Christian prudence, Christian wisdom, and where we're at, and and that's why. Would you add to that anything?
No, I don't really have anything to add in that. I grew up in Southeast Louisiana, where it was predominantly Catholic, and so Lent always had a certain association to me with Catholicism.
Okay.
But at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with observing a period of time in which we want to say, let's devote ourselves to prayer. Maybe devote myself more to fasting or anything like that. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Absolutely nothing wrong.
So we don't need to make fun of it and say that isn't that something you find in your dryer?
Yeah, I know.
Did I do that?
Yeah.
I actually do things for Lent, just personally, but I do it not so religiously. It's just a kind of a rhythm for me. The 40 days of I get off social media. That's one thing I do during Lent. So
it's a helpful way to mark out a period of time.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, you have been listening to the Sound in Faith podcast, coming to you from Faith Baptist Fellowship in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's been so good having this conversation today. Really enjoyed it. And I just want to encourage everybody in what we said. If you're looking to be discipled, go find someone, ask them to disciple you. If you've never discipled someone, find that young man, find that young woman in your church, take them under your wing, and spend some time with them, intentionally seeking to point them to Christ. Awesome. Good conversation today. This has been the Sound in Faith podcast. I'm Pastor Thomas Lawson.
And I'm Pastor Mike Johnson.
And Lord willing, we'll see you Sunday.